Welcome to my earnings preview of the NIO Q2 2020 numbers. As promised, this video will be a deep dive in NIO financials and a preview in what I think could happen next week, what are my expectations on these numbers. And if you are one of our Patreons, yesterday I already sent out a post where I actually gave a summary of what I am going to tell you in this video. And yesterday, of course, it was a big down day, and these are the days where I do most of my buying actually. So I use the US-China trade tensions in order to analyze some stocks and also making some purchases. So as I'm always transparent about it, yesterday I also bought a significant new stake in Tesla. I also bought more NIO as well as some other stocks. So my patrons will know that I also have now a price target for Huami. And yeah, if you want to know more about that, you can either become a patron or wait until I find the time to make new videos on that. Because this video is all about NIO financials, so I'm not going to cover anything about the trade war, about Tesla and so on. And yeah, I will walk you through what are my calculations, what do I think about the revenues that NIO will be making, and what will they be guiding, what will be the operational profit, what is the cash situation, and also can NIO finally stop the bleeding in terms of burning cash a lot. So I finally found the time to update my Excel sheet where I'm tracking the NIO vehicle sales, where I also model the revenues and also look at the NIO official earnings and yeah, try and make estimations on where it could go in the future based on my understanding of where NIO is going. So the summary of my analysis so far is that it's actually looking quite positive. I'm quite optimistic about next week, about the earning call. At the same time, I'm always not trying to be too optimistic and too bullish. However, this time I have the feeling that NIO will really deliver on their guidance. With the new CFO, I think he kind of knows how to manage investor expectations better than before. As an early investor in NIO, I actually witnessed the times when NIO was canceling earning calls one day before, or actually the day, and the stock price was tanking minus 25%. I think NIO is now a new company and in a better position. However, of course, anything can happen with a new startup and yeah, a company in the early stages like NIO. So take everything that I am going to say today with a grain of salt, because actually it could be totally off. It's just my personal idea of where NIO will be going, and this is my journey and this is what I'm sharing with you. So don't trade on this information. You need to do your own due diligence and come up with your own decisions on what to do. Okay, let's first take a look at the revenues. And I'm estimating that NIO will be posting 500 millions in revenue. So that is actually beating their guidance by a small, tiny bit. And how I did do it is I actually calculated the sales here. So 10,331 cars. And I'm calculating here with an average sales price of $46,500, which is slightly higher, but only tiny bit higher than last quarter. I know that if we're looking at the sales and the sales ratio here between the ES6 and the ES8, that actually the model split here is showing that we're now having 78% of EC6 sales and 22% of ES8 sales, which is higher than in the last quarter. And usually the ES8 is actually higher priced than the EC6. So that would actually implicate that we have a higher average of the average sales price. And actually we had a similar model split actually in Q4 2019. So actually back then we had a average sales price of around $46,800. And well, right now I do think we could be similar around that. So I'm making here a quite conservative estimation. Actually, that could actually well be higher. However, I would rather like to be here at the lower end, because the tendency was actually that we have seen falling sales prices here, and we don't know how much promotion and actually sales cuts NIO still had to do in order to sell those cars. So making here a quite conservative estimation, but 500 million or above that would actually be good in my point of view, because it's already beyond the guidance from the actual management team. And yeah, I'm calculating here also with other sales of around $20 million, so a slight increase, but also not too bullish here. Of course, with the growing consumer base, we can expect that they will be selling more in terms of services and also e-commerce products that they are offering. But I think this will only improve significantly with the new business models like the battery as a service when they finally introduce a more refined pricing for all of their customers there. So now, assuming my 480 million revenues are deriving from just the car sales, and yeah, going with the 5.5 margin that has been actually guided by the management and which I think is realistic to achieve. This would be reflected in total costs for the sales of the vehicles of 453 million US dollars. And yeah, leaving them with a gross margin of 2.7%, and this time actually a profit of 26 million US dollars. And I do think this vehicle margin is actually achievable, because if we do look at Q4 2018, that's when they actually also had a positive 4% vehicle margin. And back then they made around 8,000 vehicles which they sold. And now with more than 10,000 vehicles during this quarter, I do think there's even room for improvement. They possibly have a good order backdrop right now, and they can now order to better prices with their manufacturing partner JAC. So this should really help the vehicle margins here. And with that vehicle margin and the other costs for the sales and stuff like that, we would end up with the 2.7% of gross margin, which is actually in line with what the management was guiding. They were actually looking to maybe be above 3%. So that would also be a surprise. But in general, the big news and implication here would, of course, be the positive vehicle margin and the positive gross margins. That's what NIO needs to be looking at achieving in the future more consistently. And this time it would be actually significantly up, and that would be, of course, after Q4 2018, the first time that they achieved this substantially here. So that is really good news if it really materializes like that. I went ahead and made some estimations about research and development, the R&D and SG&A. And well, for the research and development, they mentioned in the earnings calls that they see it slightly going higher, possibly because now they know they have the money with the Hefei deal, that they can now start also investing into R&D again. Plus, the SG&A, they said that it possibly will be slightly higher, so I bumped it up here a little bit, just a tiny bit. And in general, well, that leaves them with a loss from operations of around 200 million US dollars. And then this is the big surprise and really showing what is happening under the radar and under the hood here with the NIO business model, that they may be posting, according to my views, a free cash flow of around 300 million US dollars. And that is tremendously more than they have ever achieved. And this is result of, cutting down costs, becoming now profitable on the vehicle margins and the gross margins, and really showing that this business is actually pumping money in terms of either can be reinvested in the future, as it is a growth company. This money will usually be spent once again in operational expenditures, in investments and stuff like that. So possibly we won't see too much profits being made in the near-term future. Instead, the free cash flow generated by this business will usually getting reinvested as much as they can. So in general, they will still be burning money and making a loss. So I'm calculating here with around 203 million US dollars that they will be losing this quarter. And looking at the cash position, they went in this quarter with 338 million in cash. And then I was also looking at, of course, the new public offering in which they raised around 430 million US dollars with diluting shareholders, with making a new public offering. They may have actually issued more shares, but I'm just calculating with the shares that we know that they have been publicly selling for sure. And of course, with the Hefei deal, they also had to pay tranches. Like I assume they already paid 2 tranches into the deal with the NIO China, in which they paid 2 times 180 million. And calculating on that with the burn rate that they're currently having and so on, that would leave them with 352 million in cash by the end of this quarter. Now this calculation is quite uncertain here. It could be off in many ways because I can only guesstimate like how much money NIO was actually burning during this quarter. However, I think it is quite realistic to be around the 350 million US dollars. And this also may mean that if in case that the stock price is rallying on that news, NIO may actually in the future also consider once again of raising more US dollars in cash, because remember, NIO still has to pay further tranches, although there are smaller tranches, into the NIO China entity when the new investments coming in also from the new investors. So this is part of the deal. This is how it's going to be. And of course, NIO will also need some more working capital in US dollars in the NIO ADR that we are invested in. So this means that yes, NIO is still burning money, they are still unprofitable. However, they kind of stopped depleting a little bit here. They are in much better position in terms of the financing with the Hefei deal and also with the higher stock price right now. So everything's looking quite good here. Although, if they are still having 350 million US dollars in the banks, of course, this is not a really nice and big cash cushion, because also in the next quarter, they may still be losing some money. Although that will be the big issue in this earnings call. What will be the guidance by the NIO management? Because now we have the new situation that NIO actually received the new funding in the China entity. This is mostly CNY funding, so they can use that money mostly for paying for the operations and so on. So I guess this way it may get a much more leaner cost structure for the ADR. We may see that also with the new entity for the joint venture with CATL, where they are outsourcing the battery business, and also with the new deadline which they got from the banks, that they will now introduce the battery as a service business model, and thereby splitting the car from the battery. And also in a financial terms, this may help them to separate actually the battery business from the car business, and that is my views. How they will be raising the guidance to actually double-digit gross margins. So that will be really exciting for the stock, but I'm not 100% sure how they are actually going to do that. So that is really the black box for this earning call, but it's something to be quite excited about if they are actually doing that and announcing that next week. This will be possibly super bullish for the stock. And if my expectations on the fundamentals of these numbers are correct, only based on those numbers, the stock could actually already be rallying, because yes, of course, some of the expectations are priced in already, but clearly that would be a beat on most of the aspects of the numbers. The free cash flow would be a surprise. The gross margins positive would be quite surprising, I think, for most analysts as well. So we really see here, if we look at the longer charts here, that we are kind of at a turnaround point here, a make or break point in the business model, that we kind of finally see the first steps towards a hockey stick of growth and possibly also improvements on the bottom line, and NIO possibly showing a clearer path to profitability. However, this construct here is still quite, in the early phases, tiny and also fragile. So in case just one tiny piece of this puzzle will not fit according to the analysts' numbers, we could also certainly see a setback, and we need to be more patient as long-term holders for the stock. However, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I actually bought some more NIO going into those earnings, and I'm doing this despite the fact that I don't think NIO is currently a bargain in terms of that it is undervalued anymore. It was undervalued in the very beginning, so I'm having a cost average of around $3 a share for NIO. So I now opened a new portfolio in which I am accumulating more in terms of the long-term growth prospectus that NIO will be delivering more value to long-term holders and thereby I do think it still is possible to make an entry in NIO right now. However, of course, there's also still substantial risk in the business model on the outcomes of profitability in the future. And speaking about the future, to sum it up again, it will be interesting. The most interesting part actually about the earning call, what will be the guidance? So I do actually think that NIO management will be guiding for around 12,000 deliveries next quarter. And I'm actually calculating with revenues of $570 million next quarter. So we do see that the candlesticks are getting larger here. So this is the nice growth. I actually also expect just continuous growth in the next quarters. So usually Q3 and Q4 are good quarters for the automotive industry. And based on that, I do think NIO is mainly supply constraints. So I do think it's realistic that they will achieve a 5,000 cars per month production rate by the end of the year, and giving an outline also how they want to grow further than that in the next year. And generally, of course, the BAS business model is super important for the hopefully double-digit margin guidance, and also hopefully guidance on how this NIO China entity is actually used to soak up most of the costs and the operational expenses for NIO in the future, and whether or not this also means that NIO needs to raise more US capital either for maybe global expansion in the future, or also for committing to the investment in NIO China as well as having some more working capital in US dollars. So yeah, these are my estimations for next week. As I mentioned before, they are positive, they are optimistic, at the same time not too bullish, for instance, on the sales numbers. However, they could also be disappointing. The NIO has a history of disappointing during earnings calls. However, once again, my feeling is that the CFO knows what he is doing in this regard, and that way could be actually quite positive, and I hope that he will prove me right on that. Otherwise, let me know down in the comments what you are expecting from the earnings call. Also, whether or not you will be selling your shares into the call, or if you are accumulating more, or if you're just holding it. I mentioned already what I am doing in my video here, but this shouldn't be guiding you what you should be doing, because you are in a different financial situation, and also you may have bought or sold NIO differently than I have in the past. So good luck with trading on NIO. I hope we have some positive news next week, and see you then by reviewing the actual outcomes. And yeah, have a great weekend and also a good start into the next week, and see you soon.